Amy, hello.
Hey, how are you today?
I'm very well. It's so nice to see you.
And
Um,
you?
we first met quite some time ago when we were both in Leadership, New Jersey. I believe that was in 1996. Um,
Correct.
I have been following your fantastic career and all of your accomplishments and was excited to see that you are now Executive Vice President and Chief Experience Officer at one of New Jersey's largest hospitals, if not the. And can you explain a little bit about what that is?
Sure. I'm the Chief Experience Officer at RWJ Barnabas Health, and we have facilities that cover 9 counties and serve the potential of serving 5 million people, and we are blessed to be able to care for 2.5 million people within that geography. So it's really exciting, and obviously one of the, healthcare is going through a tremendous transformation, but one of the largest transformations is how we see our customers, right? When we think about healthcare and patients, it's not the thing necessarily you say, wow, that's something I want to get up and do every day, and that's going to be a great customer experience. It's complicated, it's bureaucratic, there's insurance involved and all sorts of things. And we know now, because of what it's going to take to create good outcomes, that we really have to engage our patients and our employees, quite frankly, in an entirely different way. So hence the creation of the Chief Experience Officer. We've always been customer focused and make sure that we have our patient first and foremost. But much like other companies and other industries, we don't only have one stakeholder. There are lots of people who you have to make sure you keep happy in this process. And so doctors and clinicians were really the drivers in reference to how we structured a lot of our work. I mean, think about hospitals as it is. You're sick. So definitely the first thing I want to do is come to another building and see somebody to figure out why I'm sick. Well, that doesn't make sense. If I can be cared for at home, or I can have as we're doing right now, something that's done telemedicine wise and allows me to understand my condition better, I'd rather do that. I don't want to leave my house if I don't have to, but I do want the care available to me when I need it. And so that's entirely different than how we built the system. We built it on patients coming to doctors and hospitals for care. And now consumers and, quite frankly, the cost is forcing us to look at things much differently. So it's exciting. It's not stable by any stretch of the imagination. And it also requires an entirely different thought process about how we interact with our customers and understand what our customers expect of us, hence the creation of the position.
You said that it was about engaging your customers. Can you unpack engage for me?
Sure. Especially in this business more than any other, right? What we do, how we live, whether or not I got up at 4 this morning to do those exercises or not, will determine the outcomes of my health. And we now in the healthcare industry are currently in a process of transition where we previously were paid based upon how much we did, how many tests we ran, how many procedures we did, all of those types of things. In the last 20 years, both the healthcare system and the federal government has said, you know what, it's no longer about this type of model where it's how much you deliver care in order to spend, but what the outcome of that care is. And we can see so much has happened in our lifetime in reference to what we expect. Breast cancer was a disease you would die from. It is a disease that we can, depending on when we diagnose, we can cure and maintain you and keep you alive for years that you could never have imagined. And there's so many diseases like that, but all of them are impacted, even in how you heal, based upon our engagement with you and whether or not you're going to have trust in the advice we give and then actually follow it. I may take your advice and not actually follow it. So those are the main driver around the engagement, is really making sure that it is a partnership and how we deliver the care, and a partnership and how we help you maintain your health and what your optimal health is.
You said that it's not a very stable time. Probably an understatement. How do you get to trust and partnership in such a fast moving, unstable time?
I think it starts at the core, right? Am I transparent in the information I'm giving you? Am I accessible to you? Even in a conversation, right? We now must use an electronic medical record because all of the data we take actually influences how we improve people's care, and it influences how we get paid, and it influences our ability to show outcomes. But sometimes that computer screen does not create that welcoming environment. So understanding how we in, involve the technology while not disengaging the patient is part of it. Um, Also making sure that the patient never, um, making sure that the patient's environment is understood so the clinician can provide the right advice, right? So if I have an 80-year-old and I say, here are the 17 drugs you need to take, and you need to take them in these increments all throughout the day, and this one at 2 and this one at 5, if, quite candidly, we're doing everything we can to just maintain our lives. Trying to keep with that kind of schedule is hard regardless of what age you are. And so really understanding those complexities, which are critical and how the outcome comes, is really important. And that's a skill, quite candidly, that some doctors have been trained in, but others are only trained in their specialty, and to think about what they need to do. But now we must, for the sake of the patient, look at all the whole patient at all times and have that constant communication and coordination. And that evolves. People's personal environments, right? My dad just turned 90. My mom is 82, and she has dementia, and they live in a house that doesn't meet their needs, but that they're committed to. So it's really important that their caregivers understand, okay, he's going to do steps, and he's going to go cut trees down as he did yesterday, and he's going to do all sorts of things you don't think he should do at 90, but that's his choice. And part of this also is really driven by understanding what the wants as well as the needs are, health needs of that consumer is, because it will determine whether or not they're going to show up with a potential negative outcome or
How do you make those determinations? And I'll give you a hint in how I'm hoping you'll answer, since you know that this is, I'm interested in speaking with you about speaking and listening.
so when you think about how you determine and gather this information, part of it is I started with this isn't a stable time, right? Everybody's feeling pressured to meet people's needs, get them in to see the doctor when they want to, get all the people that want to be seen, and so you feel that fast pace often. But the listening is so important, right? And working as a team. When I had the privilege, as you know, of being CEO of a children's specialized hospital, which is where kids with very severe disabilities are cared for. And my dietary staff and my environmental services staff were critical players in our team, not just because of the work they did, but because people said things to them that they wouldn't say to white coats. So making sure that everybody understands their role in that team of having that critical piece of information. So I'll give you a poignant example that comes to mind. We do a doctor meeting on the floor. They deliver a diagnosis and a message about what was going to happen. Everybody would be fine. Do you have any questions? The answer would be no. An hour would go by. They'd be in the cafeteria hysterical, right? And so that dietary person knew that there was a problem. So they would flag that. They would go ask them if they could be of help. In some cases, they may actually gather the information that they need and then get it back so people know that they still have questions about it. In some cases, we needed the rabbi or the chaplain to come sit with them because they had to process, or the social worker, or quite frankly, they just needed to cry. You cannot force those things. And that information that you gain in those things is golden, just absolutely golden. So the engagement part for the employees, comes not just with that doctor or that nurse, but everybody understanding they can play such a critical role. And my security guards knew exactly what was, I say that's not the right short term of words. The security guys knew that they would see when they call them by name, how they answer. We're going through a journey right now on high reliability, and every day there's another story about somebody who may not be directly the care provider understanding those little things. And it's 1,000 little things make a difference. I'll give you another quick example. Dietary staff person goes in to deliver a tray. This woman's been in the hospital for 5 days. Every day she'll say, Taylor, it's good to see you. How are you doing today? And every day she answers, or she'll say, last night wasn't good, or today was good. So she came in, she put it down, and she said, Taylor, how are you doing today? And she made eye contact with her, looked at her, but just, was really, didn't have any visible things, but didn't respond as she had done the last 5 days. She went out, she had a questioning attitude. She went out to the nurse and she said, something's wrong with Taylor. I really think somebody needs to go look at her. She had just gone into a stroke. Now, that dietary staff was not trained in how to identify a stroke. She just knew that something was off. And it is so important. So my father's cardiologist is a history buff, and my father was a history teacher, so he'll talk to him about American history. He'll talk about all sorts of things that are not have any relation to his heart condition. But he knows that his heart condition is what's going to kill him eventually. And so if he doesn't have that trusting relationship where they could have talked about these things, when he goes to him and says, you know what, which he did, it's time for a pacemaker. And my father says, I'm not doing that. He's like, okay, so I'm going to tell you straight. Then you're not going to be here. It's just that simple. I don't care how much you exercise. Your heart isn't going to be able to do it. And he only after you've had years of those types of relationships can you have that kind of conversation. Otherwise, the person's going to shut down and leave and go to another doctor. That trust, and it doesn't come from one session, right? It comes from 1,000 little things. Sometimes we only have one session though, right? That nurse, that interaction, that right time to do the right thing. And that's when your listening skills have to be honed. And that's why it's so hard on staff, because they're looking and thinking about, I got to get back into that computer and enter these things. I got to do this, I got to do that. But your antenna has to be up. So you can see those little things, capture them, and make sure you're handing them off to people to help improve that score. And you only can do that if you're listening and if you're outside of yourself, but also understanding that this gift that you're given to actually care for a patient is the most precious, right? Because nobody wants to show you their vulnerability. So not only are they probably, in a smock they hate, all these other things, they're completely vulnerable depending on you, which nobody wants to be. So making sure you don't forget the person on the other side of it is the critical piece of it. For us in healthcare, it's actually a benefit because people are often called to this, right? They could do anything. And even if they're our CFOs or our chief financial officers, they could be a CFO anywhere, but they're called to healthcare because they want to make a difference. And helping people push back those day-to-day challenges and never forget their purpose is part of the critical element of this role, because everybody else has a task, right? Everybody says, I got to get this work done in finance or quality or anything else. And our role in the experience department is really looking at, all right, this is the only time I'm going to get to be able to drive this one chance to do the right thing, small thing. And it's not big. I'm not parting the oceans. I'm making sure you had a cup of coffee. I'm seeing that you were struggling walking. I noticed that your daughter brought in flour. All those little things build the trusting relationships that you're going to need to get through this really tough health circumstance. Or even to say, as in my case, look, you are on the risk. If you don't start going to the gym, this is not going to work well. I wouldn't have heard that had I not had that trusting relationship. Or I would have said, I'm not going anyway. I don't care what they say. I want to be here. And that's what we're trying to do, is find out how to create those opportunities for staff to engage with their patients in order to make that happen. Again, it doesn't only have to be the clinician. Anybody in your circle can have those impacts, and you have to understand that and make sure as the employer that you're making everybody feel valued and understand that importance. And it's complicated, it's messy, it's not stable, but it's the exciting part of where we are right now in the opportunity to reframe healthcare.
It's complicated and it's messy. It's also incredibly obvious in some ways, but it's also incredibly wise that it comes from decades of experience and wisdom synthesized to this level of understanding. Can you tell me a little bit about your journey and getting to this position and learning to listen at this level and empower other people to listen?
Yeah. So much like anybody who takes challenges, right, and especially women, this is a big deal, right? Women are the first to say, no, I can't do that. No, no, no. Yes, you want me to take on this new role, but not for me. I could never, whatever the rest of the sentence is. I had a series of conversations with our leader, Barry Ostrowski, who is a visionary leader that has set out for us this audacious goal that we are going to improve the health of the community. Not just the health of the individual that we happen to walk through our door, but if we are going to be a true health company, not just a provider of health care, but a health company, that's a different relationship, right? That is boots on the ground, talking about different difficult issues, violence and the food deserts, and how we make sure our children are in situations that they can learn and grow, how we keep our seniors safe, all sorts of things. And, some of us have been trained in how to provide care, not in these big, audacious goals. So when he said to me about 2 years ago, I want you to take on driving culture, I'm like, I'm not doing that. I'm an ops person. I do operations. I don't, I really like what I do. I'm good at this. That stuff. And he came back to me a couple of times, and finally he said, listen, you care about this. You care about this deeply. Help others care as much as you do, right? I just listened to, I'm listening to a book by Dolly Chugh from Columbia, who wrote this book about how can it be that if we have so many nice people in the world, we still have all this implicit bias going on. And what it talked about was the gentleman who started the sit-ins during the civil rights movement. And his answer was really simple. I just had to do something. You just have to do something sometimes. And you start by listening. You don't start to, create a cultural change that's going to change the world. You start by saying, I'm going to do this interview with Taylor because somebody else may hear it and they'll learn something else, and hopefully they'll share it with me. Or some of my most poignant moments with parents are when I stopped talking and I listened. And they improved our care. They partnered with us on how to help other people. One of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from Sister Jane Brady, who ran St. Joe's Patterson for 45 years. And I said, Sister, I want to be a CEO that's as strong as you are. I want to understand. Tell me, what's the one piece of advice you'd give me? She looked me straight dead in the eye. She said, do nothing for the first 6 months. If you're any good, which we'll see, you'll be there and you'll have the rest of your career to improve. But for the first 6 months, you don't know enough to give advice. You need to listen. And I took her counsel, and it was wise. And I think that all of us need to make sure that even if we've been experts in our field, the people who know the most about our what it feels like to be a customer are the customers. We need to stop telling them what they should want, and we need to listen to them, engage them in the process. That's why family members and and patients are so important to be setting up, not just here, let me test this patient portal with you, but how do you read this? Help me edit this. We have them integrated and are continuing to integrate them into our facilities to be partners with us on our journey because they live it, they know it. I know what I hope happens, but I know how it feels. And let me just tell you something, when you ask somebody, they'll tell you. They'll tell you every step of the way exactly what they want changed and what needs to be improved. Not because they're being critical, because they want us to do better. And we want to do better to be able to engage them differently. And that's, again, that's the messy part of culture change. That some of it seems so obvious, as you say, but when you have 75 tasks in a day to do, you lose sight of it, right? I mean, and again, those small things, calling someone by their name, saying thank you, making sure you remember that the daughter was in and that, you know, her son had been sick or whatever it is, it matters and it buys you loyalty and it buys you commitment that they know you're invested in them. And our bet is that it's going to actually improve how we interact with them to improve the health outcomes, both of themselves and our greater community. So it's big and complicated and audacious in some way to think that we're actually taking this on. But we know that what we've done, and with all of the money we spend, we're not living with a quality of life that we want to. And all you have to do are look at our scores. Look at the mortality within the United States. Look at how it is compared to other industrialized nations. Look at all those things. And you can say, well, their insurance system is different and this is different. At the end of the day, none of the differences matter. What matters is we're still caring for people. And we need to figure this out. We owe it to them. It's just that simple.
Amy, as I've done these interviews, I'm realizing that what's at the heart is that it's about listening to oneself and reflecting upon how one speaks and listens and where you find the opportunities to do that. One of the reasons I'm doing these interviews is I'm hoping that other people will be inspired by listening in on people reflecting on their own practice. What reflective practice do you have to check in on how you yourself are communicating? And side note, did you get up at 4 a.m. to exercise today?
Yes, I get up at 4 a.m. because that's the only time I can actually make it work for me. So, you know, you can judge, but there are 6 of us that were there. So, you know, it's interesting. I'm a cradle Episcopalian, and my priest, Mother Karen, gave a sermon once about whether or not you're living the full life that you can live, or whether or not you're looking for credit. And when you start with the premise of this is the right thing to do, and this is who I am, versus if I do these 3 things, you know, I'll get X or Y or Z, which I call transactional, or somebody will think I'm a better person, or I'll get recognized for it in some way. That's not who you are. It's what you do. When, you know, the gentleman that did the sit-in, he didn't sit in to change the world. He sat in because he wanted lunch at Woolworths, right? That's who he was. He knew it was going to be risky. He knew all those things. When you're kind to someone, when you're authentic, all of those things is who you are. When you treat people how you want to be treated in all circumstances, not just in healthcare, then you see it. When you begin to look and unveil and understand your implicit bias, we all have it. None of us can say we don't. You know, mine is about people who cut me off on the road. You know, I have immediate bias about who those people are and how they think, and you know, and I'm no, because when I do it, it's because I'm late for something that's really important and somebody's going to be harmed if I don't. You need to actually check yourself. And I check myself all the time. And I don't do it perfectly by any stretch of the imagination, but part of it is forcing yourself to listen and look and think about, what did I just say there? Why did I just do that? You know, somebody didn't recognize that I, just lifted heaven and hell to make something happen. How come I didn't get, are you doing it for credit? Or are you doing it because it's the right thing to do? And there's no secret potion to any of this. It's hard work. It's hard work day in and day out being a leader. You can become expert in your field and it can come to you easily. But when you lead, that's a different responsibility. It is a burden that you willingly carry. And for those people who don't see it that way, then they should be expert in their field and do the task, but they shouldn't be leaders. And that's one of the challenges, is when you're expert in your field, sometimes you get promoted and you end up running things, but you don't have that same expertise to understand how you're perceived. And again, that goes back to my patient story, because they'll tell you, and we give them lots of vehicles right now to tell us, and we can say, well, they were wrong about how they perceived. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter whether they were wrong or they were right. That's their perception, and you need to address that yourself, not tell them how they were wrong. Figure out what it was that you or the organization has done to make them feel that way. And if you don't, you'll be out. It's just that simple. It's just that simple. And so we've moved to, part of our review process in reference to performance review and feedback is not just about how were your clinical skills, but how did you interact with people? How did you live our values? How do we help you be better at that piece of it? Because you may be expert at a clinical area, but you need to hear what people are saying. And I'm not talking about big things, right? I'm not talking about, rude or hostile or any of that stuff. It's the little subtleties that set the tone for your staff and for our patients. And that's why it is so important to be keyed into how you're being received, And if you have a bad interaction, own it, right? I worked really hard to make sure that I knew my employees, and I had 1,000 of them, so it was easier than if you run 35,000, which is where we are right now at RWJ Barnabas. But I would have people who trusted me enough to tell me. And at the end of the day, one of them, I was walking through the hall really quickly and on my phone and had a bad, just left a really bad thing. And then later, I noticed she was different with me. And so I said, in this case, I'll use you. Taylor, what was going on there? And she's like, you didn't speak to me. I was like, well, no. She's, well, you were obviously mad at me. Well, no, I had nothing to do with you. But she didn't have a context or a conversation. And had I not been willing to acknowledge that difference and then own what she gave me, she would have held that. And you carry that stuff in your belly. And again, I do not believe people leave for salary. Some, there might be $2 an hour makes a difference in some people's lives. But if you're part of a team and you know that we're all in this together, people stay. Employees stay. They leave. They say they're leaving for salary, but they leave because of these 100 small little things. And that's why it's so important for leaders to have their antenna up at all time. And I use this expression, which may not be politically correct, but you're not allowed to have a bad hair day. Like, you cannot be owning that stuff when you're walking with your employees, because they immediately perceive that it's about them. And because we all do, we're human, right? And no matter how much you want to say is, it rolls off my back, but it doesn't. Every interaction is an opportunity. And if you mess it up, go back and own it. You know what? I didn't do that as well as I should have. I could have said this, and somebody yesterday had the opportunity to introduce somebody, and they had a very complicated last name, and so they just took a pass and just called them by their first name. That's disrespectful when everybody else who was introduced had both names said. Now, it's those subtle things, but that's the implicit bias that it breaks your heart when you're the one that's being impacted. Now, I know this person, and they would never intentionally do that. But we've got to create trusting relationships to be able to have those conversations with people, to then be able to work through that, because that's the only way barriers change. That's the only way we can really provide those opportunities. And the times that I see that it's the most exciting is when somebody comes in one role. They come in, serving the line in the cafeteria, and I get the gift of watching them through the progression of their career, and they end up going back to school, and they become a clinician or whatever they define as success. And you can see that evolution, and that is the role of leadership. That is the role of us identifying people who have that little thing in their belly that could make them successful, but they don't see it. They don't see it in themselves, or they don't even think it's possible given where they came from. And that's why a leader's responsibility is to help them break down those doors, help them first see it in themselves, and then nudge, 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 nudge to make them take those risks. And again, that's what we're doing with our patients. My father wouldn't get the pacemaker the first 9 times we talked about it, but it was only after those hundreds of nudges, and quite frankly, that somebody finally told me he could turn it off if he got sick. And honest to God, that's what. But again, we would not have gotten to yes if we didn't understand that. And I happened to be with him during that crucial conversation, and finally, I heard what he was saying. Like, I heard him saying, I need to know that if I can't live the life I want to lead, somebody will actually turn it off. And once he heard that, he was done. Literally, we were in and out, and the whole thing happened. And I'm thrilled to tell you, 5 years later, he's still cutting down trees and doing strong. But you have to listen, not to what your head is saying. And my head at that moment was saying, I want my father with me forever. I don't, how do we get him to say yes? All this noise, instead of just shutting up and listen to what they're saying. Listen to what people don't always have the words to give you where they are, but you can still it out of them, or listen and then be able to ask that thoughtful question that will get it to the heart of it. And when you get to that heart, that's when you have change. When you get to that core is when you actually can change the world, as well as change it for an individual. And that is our job, more than anything else.
Thank you for these reflections and for these stories. And I'm so happy to hear about your dad doing well as well, Amy.
And thank you for having the courage to help us learn how to have these conversations, because candidly, this is not sexy, and it's not a silver bullet that you can solve in 2 seconds, but it is the work. It is what we are charged to do. And those of us who actually are fortunate enough that somebody trusts us to put us in these roles, we need to honor that, and we need to do it well.